Welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, the key to PMP exam success. Here's your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner.
Hello and welcome back to part 2 of our lesson on conduct procurements here on the Project Management Prepcast. I'm your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner. In part 1 we saw the overview, the inputs and the first tools and techniques. We are now going to conclude the tools and techniques, look at the outputs, do a review and also give you a sample question at the end. In regards to our tools and techniques, you already know everything there is to know about the bidder conferences, proposal evaluation techniques, independent estimates, and expert judgment. We're now moving on to advertising, analytical techniques, and procurement negotiations. Let's assume that for your next project, you want to increase the number of potential sellers that give you a proposal. What do you do? How do you find more sellers? How do you publicly post opportunities? Well, you advertise, of course. You advertise either in newspapers or in industry journals, or you can use online advertising to reach more sellers and post public notifications that may be required. Or how about a billboard next to the freeway? Well, not likely that you advertise your project there, your product, more likely. But hey, who knows? It may have been done. For the exam, what you should be aware of is that if you are the government, you will very likely have clear regulations about which projects you must advertise. Most likely, governments must advertise any pending contracts, but they are less likely to do so when we are just talking about procuring goods. The idea behind increasing the number of potential sellers should be self-explanatory. Analytical techniques can be and are used to help organizations gauge the readiness of a vendor or supplier to meet procurement needs, determine cost, or the potential for overruns. This is a good opportunity to use the available experts to evaluate vendors and not to do this on your own. So go ahead and use the subject matter experts on your team. You may even go as far as hiring an external consultant for this part. After all, they are the experts in their field and they will be able to ensure that a vendor is up to the task. A typical analysis involves submitting preliminary procurement documents to learn if a vendor is even interested, conducting company background checks, interviewing a vendor's sales and technical department, or visiting their site and sometimes conducting inspections to find out if they can deliver what they claim in their proposals, because if they can't, well, there could be delays and cost overruns. The main objectives are to ensure vendor readiness and identifying any areas of risk that should be monitored more closely. Our last tool and technique are procurement negotiations, which often means contract negotiations. And yes, we mean a formal written contract here. Such a contract or agreement may include terms and conditions, responsibilities, the applicable law, terms of payment, a schedule, high-level milestones, the price, or whatever else is deemed necessary. You can, of course, also negotiate an informal contract, but the idea behind this tool and technique is that at the end you will have a document that can be signed by everyone involved. The contract may even refer to other documents. For instance, there may be appropriate language in the contract that translates into the contents of the procurement documents that the sellers responded to are part of this contract. You also need to understand that while the term negotiation might indicate a two-way street, it doesn't need to be. If you are procuring a COTS, a commercial off-the-shelf item, then the seller may define the terms of the contract and you as the buyer simply accept those terms. Or it could be the other way round, that the buyer dictates the terms and the seller only has the option to accept. This really all depends on the situation of your negotiations. So now we know that negotiation is a big part of the conduct procurements process, but who does this for our project? Well, you as the project manager, you should not negotiate. In fact, nobody on the project management team should be actively negotiating. Instead, the project team might have a lead negotiator, and in those cases, a member of the project team will be involved in negotiations. You can sit in and help as subject matter experts, or you or the project management team, they can assist your lead negotiator by providing clarification. It is important to note that the processes here in procurement management are not sequential. They're really a bit all over the place. Yes, we do distinguish between the processes of plan procurement management, conduct procurements, control procurements, and then close procurements, and within those four major processes, the steps that we do, they seem to follow a certain logical flow, and everything that you do there seems to be going in sequence. But in truth, all these procurement steps, they kind of happen simultaneously and in parallel. They're overlapping. And here on the screen, you see now coming up various activities that we do in these four processes, like advertise, evaluate the sellers, and there at the top you see develop the qualified sellers list. And as you can imagine, no two procurements on your project will take the same duration. For example, if you need to buy some office supplies, well, you go down to the store and you're pretty much done. That will be a short one, but it will take much longer to buy a machine for chemical analysis that you need on your project. Especially the development of the qualified sellers list there at the top. That's not something you start on Monday and you end on Friday. This takes time, and it happens while other procurement activities go on simultaneously. So think of this graphic here, and remember, if you have multiple procurements that are ongoing at the same time, this is not happening one after the other. This is all happening in parallel. One final question that we should also discuss is the question of what do you do if a seller proposal is late? Normally, you send out the procurement documents to the sellers with instructions that their proposal must be submitted, say, by March 31st. But what do you do if one of them shows up late, or if one seller contacts you and says, we definitely want to be part of this, but we need 10 additional days? The first thing you have to remember is that you should not play favorites. Don't allow one company to submit late because you like them and not the other one. Treat everybody the same way. However, your first concern should be your project. Don't be concerned about sellers giving you their proposals late. Be concerned about sellers giving you bad proposals. Instead, that much said, your first objective is to deliver a high-class project with a high-class result. So who cares if the seller was 10 days late with their proposal? If that happens to be the best proposal, well, then you can slap their hand for having been 10 days late, but still award them the contract. If you need to, then simply extend the deadline for all sellers by a week or two. We are moving on to the 6 outputs of this process, and the first one are, of course, the selected sellers. After all, one of the main objectives of this process is to find a seller for our procurement needs, so no wonder that the selected sellers are at the top of this list. And of course, each seller will need to have a contract or specialized agreement, and we'll look at that in just a moment. Then we have the resource calendars. Here we are referring to the availability of the resources that we had negotiated with the seller. Of course, we want to have documented who or which resource is available, when and for how long. Remember that resources are both human resources, machines, or even materials. Then we may also have change requests as an output here, because as in most processes, as we do our work, we may find areas of our many management plans that need updating. Specifically called out as an output are both the updates to the project management plan and finally also the updates to the project documents. As we have just seen, our primary outputs are the selected sellers and the fact that each of these sellers will have to approve, accept, or sign an agreement. Such an agreement can take many forms. An agreement could be a handshake, it could be a detailed email, or it could simply mean filling in an online form and pressing the Order Now button. Or a more formal paper-based purchase order form could serve as your agreement. In most cases, however, an agreement is a complex legal document that contains information about applicable law, the statement of work, the technical approach, the managerial approach, schedule, liabilities, penalties, you name it. The preferred format, especially for the PMP exam, is of course the formal written contract. But it doesn't matter what form the agreement has. It is a legally binding set of conditions and compensations, and it is subject to remedy in courts, which is a roundabout way of saying that you can take someone in front of the law if they fail to perform as stated in the agreement. And that is why, of course, it is much better to have a formal contract if it comes that far. When you're going through the conduct procurements process, you will very likely find items on the project that need to be changed. For instance, your schedule baseline may have to be updated to reflect the new schedule that you now agreed upon with the seller. Or maybe the quality plan needs updating because the seller promised to deliver a higher quality. These updates will, as always, be put in place through the integrated change control process. Procurement touches many areas of your project, and therefore you may find yourself updating a large number of documents that are not necessarily or directly related to procurement. Here are a few examples of these documents and what you may be updating. On the left we see the document, on the right we see what gets updated. Our first document, the cost baseline. We may now be updating the cost baseline with the actual prices. Originally, we estimated our prices and put those into the cost baseline. Now that we have an agreed upon contract with a seller, well, we have the real prices available. So we update those in the cost baseline. The schedule baseline is next. Same thing. We now have a contract with a firm delivery date, and these need to be updated in the schedule. Then we have the scope baseline. Well, we may have found additional work packages that need to be added to our WBS. And then also the assumptions log. We've had massive assumptions during contracting, during procurements, and they need to be documented somewhere. Same thing with the quality metrics. We now have contractually agreed upon quality metrics, and they need to be updated in the quality metrics area of our project documents. Then the procurement management plan may need to be updated with additional processes or with process changes. And by the way, the cost baseline, the scope baseline, and the procurement management plan, they are all considered to be part of the project management plan. They are subsidiary documents, and the others, they're just general project documents. Oh, and before we go, let me come back to the example of my rain gutters. In the end, I decided to go with the cheapest of my 3 rain gutter companies. The reason why they were so much less expensive than the others was that they are a very small company and did not have all the administrative overhead that all the others did. And to this day, I'm still very happy with our rain gutters. Let's review what we've learned. And let's do this review by looking at what should be familiar to you at this point, the complete procurement process. So we began by planning our procurements, and we created the procurement documents, and we send those procurement documents to the sellers, and we receive their responses, their proposals in return. Then, using our source selection criteria, which we defined also in the plan procurements process, we compare these seller proposals against our source selection criteria. A seller is then selected, and to this seller we will award our contract. The process can be rather simple if what you need to procure is a commercial off-the-shelf product, one of the COTS. But if it is a major procurement, then the process can be rather lengthy and include a multitude of proposal evaluation techniques in order to objectively come to a conclusion, and you may even have to include senior management on the decision. In the end, you negotiate and agree on a contract with the selected seller. And to close, let me give you a high-level idea of what type of sample questions you can expect to find in books or in simulators. One question that I remember vividly is the one where you're given the following situation. So, the team was arguing about which of the sellers is the best one. They asked you, as the project manager, to come in and resolve the situation. And what do you have to tell your team at this point? Well, the answer is that you have to tell them that they need to go back and look at the evaluation criteria and employ the appropriate technique to objectively rate the sellers. This question tests your understanding of the whole process and how we do things, as well as which tools and techniques need to be applied at which point of the process. And while we are talking about selection criteria, one question that I saw was, what characteristics do selection criteria have? And correct responses would include that they can be objective, subjective, or that they can focus only on the price if you can procure the item easily from multiple sources. But there are also simple questions like this one. Which process is advertising part of? And the answer is, of course, that it's part of conduct procurements. But then again, we have also seen questions that rely on your experience and ask, why might you wish to meet individually with your sellers and not in a big group? Well, the answer, of course, here is that they prefer asking questions if their competitors are not in the same room. And this concludes our look at the conduct procurements process. So Justine and I repeat what we already said at the end of part 1.
Take it easy.
Until next time.